Hey Cam, what do you call someone that doesn't believe in evolution?
A fool. Even though evolution isn't all about the giggles, it's actually defined as the change in genetic composition of a population over successive generations, which may be caused by natural selection, inbreeding, hybridization, or mutations. In other words, it is the changes that occur in a species over long periods of time. But it all starts with a common ancestor who passes its genes on, which eventually end up getting passed on through a stairwell of generations.
One way to tell if two animals have a common ancestor is to look at the animal's DNA. And if there are two animals that have similar genes in the same spots of the DNA, they most likely have a common ancestor that gave rise to the trait or code segment. Also, if the two animals have a common trait, then their DNA will most likely be the same too. Also, the difference between DNA is that it determines all your protein in your body that helps make up the animals and how they are common. If they have the same DNA, then they also have the same genes and traits. DNA tells everything about species, unlike fossils' anatomy and biogeography.
Another way to prove evolution is through fossils. Finding fossils is the first and sometimes only piece of evidence when you're proving evolution of a certain species that doesn't live anymore. Once you find a fossil, you can determine if the skeletal features are similar. You can also determine what habitat the species lived in, what its behavior is like, and much more. One of the most important fossils found is the Tiktaalik. Once the fossil showed the skeletal features, we could see the anatomical similarities. Anatomy is analyzing the structures of living things. Two different ways to compare a different species' anatomy is through homologous and analogous traits. A homologous trait is a trait that is derived from a trait found in a common ancestor. For example, the wings of bats and birds are both derived from the forelimb of a common wingless ancestor. An analogous trait is a trait that has developed independently in two groups of organisms from unrelated ancestral traits. For example, bird wings and insect wings are an analogous trait. The anatomical similarities of the Tiktaalik to land vertebrates suggest that it had amphibious-like behavior in shallow water and in land near the water. What was also different about the Tiktaalik was that the head could move independently, which was different than fish during that time. This was an important adaptation for terrestrial feeding. The skeletal features of the ribs in their fins suggest that the Tiktaalik could lift itself, which proves it must have been able to move once on land.
Biogeography allows us to analyze evolutionary developments between species and look into how species got where they are today. For example, Africa and South America were once together. We know this because there are similar types of rocks on the east coast of South America as there are on the west coast of Africa. Even though rocks are not alive organisms, it still shows how biogeography splits up a group of organisms, which results in two very different species due to their difference in habitat. When this happened with animal species, the two different groups evolved in different ways due to their habitat and surroundings. After a long period of time, the two groups become two different species that can become very different.
Now, for the people who didn't believe in evolution, we just showed you 4 different ways that animals have evolved over time and how we all have common ancestors. Thanks to the efforts of paleontologists and Charles Darwin and other people, we can now prove that evolution is true.